Imagine a scene worthy of Shakespeare's pen, but played out not in a medieval castle, but in the stifling lobby of the Ambassador Hotel in Accra, the capital of Ghana, saturated with the smell of spices and cigarette smoke. The date is May 17th, 1964, and this place was supposed to be a paradise for the two most famous black men on the planet, a symbol of their return to their roots. But instead, it turned into a scaffold where one of the greatest friendships of the 20th century was executed. You probably think you know this story. The young champion and his wise mentor, the Batman and Robin of the civil rights movement, had a falling out over politics. That is the version written in school textbooks so as not to traumatize children. But the truth hidden behind the glossy photos is far uglier, dirtier, and more tragic. On that morning, in the hotel lobby, two old friends didn't just meet. Two realities collided, two worlds that could no longer exist in the same universe, and one of them had to be destroyed. To understand the full horror of the impending catastrophe, you need to look not at the faces of the heroes, but at one small, snow-white detail of wardrobe that shone brighter than the African sun that morning. Look at Malcolm X's head. He is wearing a white knitted skull cap, a kufi. To you, it is just headwear, but for this story, it is the very dagger that slices through the fabric of time. This white skull cap is a symbol that Malcolm has just returned from Mecca, from the Hajj, where he saw true Islam, an Islam of brotherhood of all races, an Islam without hatred. He returned enlightened, free from the dogmas of the sect. He learned the terrible truth about the corruption and lies inside the Nation of Islam, and he burned with the desire to tell this truth to his little brother, his best student, the man he loved more than his own brothers, Muhammad Ali. Malcolm entered the hotel with the light, springy step of a man who had cast a heavy burden off his shoulders. He was sure that their meeting here was a sign from above, divine providence. He thought, now I will see Cassius. He still mentally called him that. I will hug him. I will tell him about what I saw in Mecca, and together we will walk away from the false prophets to truly change the world. The script of their great reunion was already playing in his head, a script where the two of them become an invincible force for good. But he failed to account for one factor that turns this drama into a psychological thriller. He didn't know who was standing behind Ali. Ali was not alone. He was surrounded by a tight ring of men with cold, unblinking eyes, the son of the sect leader Elijah Muhammad and his bodyguards. You think this was an entourage? Security? No, it was a convoy. Ali, America's greatest rebel, the man who feared no U.S. government, was at this moment a mental hostage, a puppet whose strings stretched back to Chicago, to the headquarters of the Nation of Islam. For weeks, poison had been poured into his ears. Malcolm is a traitor. Malcolm envies your fame. Malcolm wants to lead you off the true path. He is an FBI agent. He is an enemy of Allah. And Ali, this young, naive guy, who was looking for a father, found him not in Malcolm, but in the leader of a sect who demanded absolute, blind obedience. Ask yourself honestly, what goes on in a person's head when they are told their best friend is the devil? First, you don't believe it. Then you doubt. And then, under the pressure of authority, you start looking for evidence of betrayal in every gesture, in every word. Ali convinced himself that Malcolm had indeed betrayed their common cause. He donned the armor of righteous anger to protect himself from the pain of losing a friend. And so, when Malcolm, shining in his white skull cap, spotted Ali across the lobby, time slowed to a complete stop. Malcolm saw the familiar face, that same beautiful, bold face that he had taught to be brave. His eyes lit up with sincere, childlike joy. He forgot about caution. He forgot that there was a price on his head. He saw only his brother. He smiled broadly, with that famous smile that could disarm anyone, and walked towards him, arms spread for a hug. "Brother Muhammad," his voice rang out in the silence of the lobby like a bell, full of hope and love. But here triggers that very Santa Barbara effect, which makes your heart clench in pain. The viewer expects Ali to waver, that he will see this sincerity, remember how they prayed together, how they laughed in diners, how Malcolm supported him before the fight with Liston when no one believed in him. We want to believe that friendship is stronger than ideology, but Ali, standing surrounded by his wardens, did not take a step forward. He didn't even blink. His face, usually so lively and animated, turned into a stone mask of contempt. He was not looking at a friend. He was looking at an enemy, and in his gaze, a sentence was read that was more terrible than any physical blow. Malcolm, continuing to walk with his hand outstretched, suddenly began to notice how the atmosphere in the room was changing. The smiles around them vanished. The people in Ali's entourage tensed, their hands sliding into their pockets. The air became thick and icy, but Malcolm, led by the inertia of his love, took another step, closing the distance to the minimum, to that distance where one can either shake a hand or stab with a knife. He still believed this was a misunderstanding, that any moment Ali would laugh and say, "I got you, old man." He looked at that very white skullcap in the reflection of Ali's eyes, hoping to see understanding there. But he saw only emptiness. Ali was preparing to utter the words that would kill Malcolm X long before real bullets hit him. And in that second, when their eyes met, history froze to record the moment of the greatest champion's greatest moral fall. To understand the physics of this catastrophe, you must imagine not just a meeting of two people, but a collision of two trains rushing towards each other on the same track, where one has brake failure and the driver of the second is intentionally flooring the gas. Malcolm X was closing the distance, and every step he took on the marble floor of the Ambassador Hotel echoed, seeming to get louder with every second. He was open. He was unarmed. He was dressed in that traditional African suit and the white skull cap that shone in the twilight of the lobby like a beacon signaling peace. There was not a single thought of defense in his head, because who defends themselves against their own shadow? Who expects a knife stab from a person whom you spoon-fed spiritual food when they were hungry and lost? Malcolm sincerely believed that now, here, on the neutral territory of Africa, far from the poisonous whispers of Chicago, the spell would break, and he would see that same Cassius who laughed at his jokes and called him Big Brother. But when less than 2 meters remained between them, that intimate distance where you can either hug a person or spit in their face, time in the hotel lobby didn't just stop, it thickened into a viscous, suffocating substance. Malcolm, whose smile was a mile wide, suddenly began to notice details that his brain refused to process in the first seconds. He saw Ali's eyes. Those very eyes that usually burned with mischievous fire now resembled 2 lumps of cold anthracite, devoid of life, devoid of recognition, devoid of even a hint of human warmth. It was the look not of a friend, and not even of a stranger. It was the look of an executioner looking at the condemned, waiting for the signal to drop the axe. And in that fraction of a second, while Malcolm's hand was still hanging in the air, extended for a handshake that never happened, the smile on his face began to slowly, agonizingly slide off, replaced by an expression of childlike confusion and primal terror. Ask yourself, what is scarier, getting punched in the jaw by a world champion, or seeing the person you love look through you as if you are empty space, as if you are a ghost who doesn't even deserve a nod? Ali didn't hit him physically. He did something far crueler, something that destroyed Malcolm from the inside faster than any bullet. He did not shake the outstretched hand. He left it hanging in the air, turning a gesture of friendship into a symbol of public humiliation. Around them, in a ring, stood the men from the Nation of Islam, and evil, triumphant smirks played on their faces because they knew the script. They knew a sacrifice was about to happen. And then came that very visual silence that makes your ears ring. The noise of the hotel, the clinking of dishes in the restaurant, the conversations of tourists. Everything disappeared. The whole world shrank to this tiny point in space where one man waited for love and another prepared betrayal. Ali took a breath, and everyone waited for what he would say. Maybe he would whisper, "Run, they are watching me." Maybe he would wink, but Ali loudly, clearly, with that announcer's articulation he had honed for years, pronounced the phrase that became the epitaph to their friendship. "You left the Honorable Elijah Muhammad." His voice sounded like the crack of a whip cutting through the silence. That was wrong. Do you understand what he did? He didn't just express disagreement. He publicly, in the presence of witnesses, renounced Malcolm, using the sex rhetoric. He repeated the words put into his mouth by the puppeteers, words that meant a death sentence. In the world of the Nation of Islam, he who goes against the leader is not just mistaken, he becomes a hypocrite, a creature who, according to dogmas, deserves death. By saying this, Ali effectively painted a target on Malcolm's white skullcap. He signaled his entourage, signaled fanatics around the world. This man is no longer my brother. He is an enemy. Attack. Malcolm froze. His hand slowly lowered. He looked at Ali and saw how deep the poison of propaganda had penetrated the champion's veins. He realized he had lost him, not just for today, but forever. The Cassius Clay he knew had died, and his body was occupied by a shell programmed for hate. But the scariest part was what Ali did after his words. He didn't wait for an answer. He didn't give Malcolm a chance to explain. He simply turned on his heels, a sharp military movement devoid of grace, and walked away, leading his entourage with him. He turned his back on the man who taught him to be proud of his skin color. This turning of the back was the final chord of humiliation. Malcolm was left standing alone in the middle of the huge lobby, small, crushed, in his now ridiculous white cap, which was supposed to symbolize purity, but became a symbol of his naivety. People around started whispering. Someone snickered, seeing how the greatest put the apostate in his place. Malcolm felt these gazes on his skin. They burned him like acid. He realized that Ali hadn't just rejected his friendship. He had chosen a side in the war, and that side intended to kill Malcolm. In that moment, at the Ambassador Hotel, something broke inside the strongest fighter for black rights. He looked not like a revolutionary, but like a father publicly disowned by his beloved son. And as Ali walked away without even looking back, Malcolm X realized his clock had started counting down, because now, without the protection of his most famous student, he had become the easiest target in the world. When Muhammad Ali's broad back disappeared around the turn of the Ambassador Hotel corridor, taking with it not only his entourage, but also the last hope for reconciliation, Malcolm X remained standing in the center of the vestibule, and at that moment he felt not resentment, not disappointment, but a chilling cold that penetrates to the bone even in the 40-degree African heat. You think this was just a quarrel between two buddies? You are mistaken. The second Ali publicly renounced him, Malcolm, who knew the inner workings of the Nation of Islam better than any other person on earth, realized what had actually just happened. His immunity had been revoked. Ali was his shield, his bulletproof vest. As long as the champion wavered, as long as there was a possibility he would choose Malcolm's side, the fanatics dared not touch Big Brother. But now that Ali had pronounced those fatal words of condemnation, he had effectively issued a license to kill, and Malcolm, adjusting that very white skull cap on his head, which now seemed like a target, realized he was a walking dead man who had exactly as long to live as it took the killers to load their weapons. Ask yourself, how does a person behave who knows they have been sentenced to death by those they considered family? Malcolm returned to America not to hide, but to speak the truth louder than ever, but every step he took was now accompanied by the shadow of fear. His phone was tapped, his car was followed, and Molotov cocktails flew into his house in the middle of the night, while his wife and small daughter screamed in terror, choking in the smoke. And where was Muhammad Ali during this time? The viewer wants to believe that the greatest, learning that his mentor's house had been firebombed, grabbed the phone to offer help or at least money for a safe haven. But the reality of 1964 shatters these hopes to pieces, exposing the darkest side of fanaticism. Ali didn't call. Ali didn't write. Moreover, he did something far more monstrous. He poured oil on the fire. In interviews he gave during those months, Ali called Malcolm a hypocrite, repeating the sex handbooks, and every word he threw into the microphone was like a stone thrown at a man already standing on the edge of the abyss. Do you think Ali didn't understand what he was doing? Do you think he was just a naive boy? That is a convenient lie. Ali saw the headlines. He knew Malcolm's life hung by a thread. But his ego, inflated by the flattery of Elijah Muhammad's circle, did not allow him to show mercy. He convinced himself that Malcolm's suffering was Allah's just punishment for betrayal. It was that very Santa Barbara effect. Turned inside out, the hero we love turned into an accomplice to persecution, watching his friend's agony with the cold indifference of a Roman emperor. And then came February 21st, 1965, Sunday, the Audubon Ballroom in New York. Malcolm steps onto the stage to address the people who still believed in him. He smiles, but in his eyes is the deadly fatigue of a hunted beast. A scuffle begins in the front row, a classic distraction maneuver. Malcolm asks for calm. "Quiet, brothers. Quiet." And at this moment, 3 men stand up and open fire. A shotgun, pistols, 21 bullet wounds. Malcolm falls backward, and his blood begins to flood the stage, staining everything around crimson. That very white skullcap, the symbol of his new faith and purity, rolls off his head and falls into the dirt, trampled in the panic of the crowd. The great orator, the man who gave a voice to millions, fell silent forever, killed by those he once called brothers. But the scariest moment of this story happened not in the Audubon Ballroom, but a few days later, when journalists found Muhammad Ali to ask him about the death of the man who made him a champion. The whole world waited for Ali to cry, to say, "My God, what have we done?" for the scales to fall from his eyes. But Ali looked into the camera with his icy, calm gaze and uttered words that made even cynical reporters hold their breath. He did not express condolences. He did not condemn the killers. He said no one can go against the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and remain alive. Malcolm got what he deserved. Do you hear that sound? That is the sound of a hero's pedestal crumbling. In that moment, Ali didn't just justify murder. He spat on his friend's grave while it was still fresh. He showed the world that fanaticism had burned out everything human in him, replacing his heart with the sex charter. He was at the peak of his physical form, beautiful, invincible, rich, but inside he was dead because he allowed the killing of the only person who loved him, not for his titles, but for his soul. Ali thought that with this phrase, he was putting a period, closing the chapter and proving his loyalty to the leader. But he didn't know that these words would become a curse that would haunt him for decades. He thought he had gotten rid of Malcolm, but in reality, he had just locked himself in a cage with a ghost that would visit him every night, when the lights went out and the applause died down. The tragedy was not that Ali didn't save Malcolm, but that he sincerely believed he was doing the right thing, and this delusion became his most terrible sin, the atonement for which would stretch over the rest of his life. Years passed, and the world seemed to forget about the blood on the Audubon Ballroom stage, washed away by streams of new news and new victories of Muhammad Ali. The greatest regained his title in the epic battle in Zaire. He became the most recognizable person on the planet, a living deity worshipped on all continents, but precisely in this moment of absolute triumph, when the roar of the crowd should have drowned out any doubts, that very silence began to sprout in Ali's life, a silence from which one cannot hide. You think conscience is a loud voice that screams in your ear immediately after a crime? Oh no, that would be too simple. Conscience is a slow poison that acts with a delay, and for Ali, the moment of truth came not immediately, But 10 years after that fateful day in Ghana, in 1975, Elijah Muhammad died, the leader of the Nation of Islam, the very man for whom Ali betrayed his brother, and as soon as the coffin lid slammed shut over the messenger, the iron curtain of secrecy surrounding the sect collapsed, exposing the rotten core Malcolm had warned about at the cost of his life. Imagine the shock of a man who built the foundation of his life on belief in a leader's holiness, and then suddenly discovered that this foundation consists of dirt, lies, and corruption. The organization's new leaders began opening archives, and Ali saw documents confirming every word of Malcolm. Illegitimate children, financial fraud, secret collusion with the very white devils they supposedly fought against. At this moment, the cruelest Santa Barbara effect in the champion's life triggered. He realized that the man he called a traitor was actually the only one telling him the truth, and the man he revered as a father used him as a cash cow and a billboard. Ali sat in his luxurious mansion, holding this evidence, and felt the ground slipping from under his feet, because the realization of his own blindness was scarier than any knockout received from Frazier or Foreman. And here we return to that very dagger we left lying in the dust on the ballroom floor in 1965, to the white skullcap. Remember it? The symbol of pure, true Islam that Malcolm brought from Mecca and which Ali rejected with such disdain? Now, years later, Ali commits an act that closes the circle of this tragedy and induces in the viewer that very intellectual orgasm from realizing the irony of fate. Ali publicly announces his departure from the Nation of Islam. He accepts Sunni Islam, the very faith for which Malcolm was killed. He begins to pray as Malcolm taught him. He begins to speak of the brotherhood of all races, repeating Malcolm's words. And finally, he puts that very white skullcap on his head. Ask yourself, what does a person feel looking in the mirror and seeing the reflection of their dead friend there? Every time he put on this headwear, Ali physically felt the weight of his guilt. He literally stepped into the shoes of the man he helped destroy. He became Malcolm X, but 15 years too late, a delay that cost the life of the generation's best mind. Ali became an ambassador of peace, a philanthropist, a sage, but every step on this path was a step in a dead man's footprints. He realized that all his current wisdom, all his philosophy of love is plagiarism. It is an echo of the words he once refused to listen to in the Ambassador Hotel lobby. But the scariest part of this epiphany was not the admission of mistakes, but the impossibility of fixing them. You can apologize to a living person, you can return money, you can rebuild a destroyed house, but you don't have a phone number to call the afterlife. Ali realized he would forever remain a debtor who cannot pay up. He began writing in his autobiography, trying to pour this pain onto paper. Turning my back on Malcolm was one of the mistakes that I regret most in my life. These words read like a confession, but the horror of irreversibility seeps through them. He wished he could fall to his knees before him. He wished he could say, "You were right, brother. Forgive me. I was blind." But instead of a friend's warm hand, before him was only a cold gravestone at Ferncliff Cemetery. Ali's greatness in the eyes of the world grew with every year. His Parkinson's disease made his image martyr-like and saintly, but inside this trembling body lived a frightened boy who knew he was an accomplice to murder. People applauded him when he lit the Olympic flame, but Ali knew this fire could not burn away his sin. He turned into a living monument to Malcolm's ideas, but this monument was built on Malcolm's bones. The irony of fate reached its apogee. The world loved Ali for who he became, not understanding that he became this way only thanks to the sacrifice of the man he betrayed. Malcolm had to die so Ali could see, and this price seemed unbearably high to the champion. Every night, left alone with himself, in the silence that neither fans nor doctors could break, Ali asked himself the same question to which there was no answer. If back then, in Ghana, he had simply shaken that outstretched hand, would his brother be alive today? and this question became his personal hell from which there was no exit, because history cannot be rewritten, even if you are the greatest. Today, when we look at archival footage where a young Cassius Clay, beautiful as a Greek god, laughs next to the serious, intelligent Malcolm X, we are seized by a strange, bitter feeling, similar to longing for a future we were deprived of. These grainy black and white films are the only proof that the greatest alliance in the history of the struggle for human rights actually existed, but they also serve as the cruelest indictment. Do you see how Malcolm looks at Ali? There is no envy in that look, no calculation, only the pride of a father watching his son surpass himself. And now, mentally transport yourself to 2010, to a quiet room in Arizona, where an old, trembling Muhammad Ali sits in front of the TV, rewatching these very frames. His face, bound by the mask of Parkinson's, expresses no emotion, but tears flow down his cheeks, which he cannot wipe away. What is he thinking about at this moment? About his belts? About the victory over Foreman? No. He is thinking about how the man who taught him to be free died alone, with a hole in his chest, believing his beloved student despised him. We are used to forgiving our idols everything. We say those were the times. He was young. He was manipulated. This is a convenient position. It allows us to wear t-shirts with Ali's image and not feel pricks of conscience. But history is not a defense attorney. It is a prosecutor who knows no pity, and it asks us a question that is impossible to dodge. If Ali was the greatest, why was he so small at the most crucial moment of his life? Why was the man who wasn't afraid to go against the U.S. government and refuse service in Vietnam afraid to shake a friend's hand in a hotel lobby? This paradox breaks the brain. Ali found the courage to stand against the most powerful army in the world, but didn't find the courage to stand against the pressure of his religious leader. He was a lion in the ring, but turned out to be an obedient sheep in the hands of manipulators, and this cowardice cost the life of a man who was more important to him than he dared to admit. And here triggers the final, most powerful Santa Barbara effect, which forces you to rethink the very concept of legacy. We consider Ali the winner, but look at the facts from a different angle. Malcolm X died an outcast, without a penny in his pocket, slandered and betrayed, but he died a free man who didn't bend to lies. Ali lived a long life, bathing in gold and fame, but he lived it with the brand of Judas on his heart, which burned him more than any disease. Who truly won this duel of fates? The one who preserved life at the cost of betrayal, or the one who lost life for the sake of truth? That very white skullcap Ali put on in old age became a symbol of his capitulation before the dead man's righteousness. He effectively admitted, "You won, Malcolm. You were right, and I was a fool." But this admission sounded into the void, because the dead do not hear apologies, and this silence of eternity became the most terrible punishment for Ali. This story leaves us with a bleeding wound that cannot be healed with beautiful words about the complexity of the era. It rips the mask off the legend and shows us a living, weak, sinful man who made a mistake that cannot be fixed. And now that you know the whole truth about the Ambassador Hotel lobby, about the cold gaze, about the words approving murder, I want to ask you a question that will divide you into two camps, and I ask you to be honest, even if you don't like the answer. Do we have the right to call a man a hero who betrayed a friend for a fanatical idea? Look at this through the eyes of Malcolm X in that last second before the shots. He knew that Ali, the man he loved like a son, wished him death. Does Ali deserve our unconditional admiration? Or should we remember him not only as a great boxer, but also as a man on whose hands, albeit indirectly, is the blood of his mentor? Was Ali a victim of brainwashing, a naive child caught in a sect? Or was he a grown man who consciously chose power and comfort over friendship and truth? Whose side are you on in this tragedy? On the side of the brilliant Ali who survived and wrote history to suit himself? Or on the side of the Malcolm, forgotten in that moment, who died so Ali could become free? Write your opinion in the comments. I will read every answer, because it is in your reaction that the true moral of this terrible fairy tale lives, which they were afraid to tell us in full for so long.